Hey, everybody, welcome to the Financial Planning Podcast. Today I have a very special guest named Brandon Peterson who's going to talk to us about estate planning documents, state documents, how they work, what's important, what should people be looking at and what people should be utilizing. So thank you for being here, Brandon.
Happy to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So can you go into your background a little bit, how you got started, your experience, why people should listen to you, that kind of stuff?
Sure. So I graduated from law school from George Mason University. It's in Northern Virginia Law School. And I went to go work for a couple different firms. Estate planning was part of my portfolio, I guess you could call it, in my first firm that I worked for a couple years. And then I specialized for a couple years after that in nothing but estate planning, estate and trust administration. So both the planning part of it, and then after people pass away, the actual implementation of the documents. So I've been doing that, for several years. I've run into all of the. I've got a lot of funny stories, to tell about, people who did what they should do, people who didn't do what they should do, family fighting, all sorts of interesting experiences dealing with this topic. So, when you asked me if I'd like to come on and talk about it, I jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, this is one of the subjects that a lot of people don't understand about their finances, and it's hard to find, an estate planner who's willing to be generous with their time. So, on behalf of me and my guests, I really appreciate you being here. So, can we start with some of the basics? Like, what are the main estate planning documents that people should have?
Sure. So you have to think of estate planning as dealing with kind of two time periods. You've got before death, you've got after death. So before death, there are contingencies and things that happen where people are disabled or they're in a coma or something's happened and they can't make decisions for themselves or otherwise carry on their life and manage their affairs. That happens in all kinds of situations when people get older or even when people get in like a traffic accident or something. So for those situations, recommend two documents to most clients. You have a power of attorney, which basically allows somebody, your agent, to step into your shoes and act for you in legal and financial matters. And then you have an advance healthcare directive, which is very similar. You're appointing an agent, but this time it's just for your healthcare stuff, right? They can talk to your doctors, fire your doctors, consent to treatment, medication, move you around, put you in a nursing home, all that kind of stuff. They're able to act for you if you can't act for yourself, right? Obviously, if you're awake and talking to your doctors or even, blinking yes for yes or no, things like that, you're in control of your healthcare. But if something has happened and you can't communicate with your doctors, this is all about who do I trust to be able to make the best decisions that I would have, what would I have done if I was here and awake, that kind of thing. So that's
Yeah.
for pre-death, that's before you pass away. That's while you're still living. Both of those documents cease to be effective when you pass away. And then you start looking at the will, which most people are familiar with the idea of a will, where you are basically appointing somebody similar, kind of like an agent, but this time you're not here. They're your representative, your executor of your will, and they are responsible for opening the estate, collecting your assets, dealing with any creditors who come forward, that kind of thing. And then ultimately, they're supposed to follow the distribution instructions in your will so that whoever you wanted to benefit from your assets gets them after you pass away. There are also provisions if you have minor children. There could be provisions for guardianship. Who would you want to be the guardian of your children? Do you want trusts for your children? Sometimes that appears in a will, so you'll appoint a trustee. So the will can be a little bit more tailored to your situation and what you want. The power of attorney and the healthcare directive are usually kind of standard forms, and they're governed by the state that you live in. So I'm a Maryland attorney, right? I use all the Maryland forms that the legislature down in Annapolis has come up with to help my clients. Everybody in Maryland's kind of familiar with those forms, and so that's what we use.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I think most people are familiar with a will because of on TV and stuff. Everyone's talking about a will, but will a lot of people don't know that wills actually do not avoid probate, and probate can be expensive. It can be time consuming. Um, can you talk a little bit about trusts and how they fit into uh, you know uh, wills, and like when should you have a will, when should you have a trust, when should you have both, when should you have neither,
Sure.
so people kind of understand that.
Yeah, so let's start with probate. The idea of, what is probate? Probate is that process that I was talking about where your executor collects the assets, deals with creditors, right? They're dealing with a government agency or maybe a court that appoints them as the executor. The court reads the will and says, okay, yeah, Billy over here is supposed to be the executor. We're going to give him letters of administration. And that is his authority from us to go out and collect everything that was in the decedent's name and deal with all that. So that process, it can be a little different in every state. All right. So of course, I'm speaking to Maryland. There are some states out there where probate can be extremely time consuming. It can take years. It can cost a lot of money. It can be very complicated. And so there are some states where it is desirable to avoid probate. There are other states, and Maryland is one of these states where, if you're just kind of an average person, probate isn't that bad to deal with, right? So it kind of depends on where you're situated, where you live. But some people, they don't like the idea of this public process playing out, right? All of their assets and everything being filed in the public record, and people potentially fighting over it. It's all on this public docket in the court. So there are ways to avoid probate because the will is not the only way that property passes when you pass away. There are a couple different ways that property can pass besides the will, right? So the first is by title, right? If you own property with somebody and you're joint owners with them, when you pass away, the other person, assuming they're still living, they could become the owner of that property. So that's a common situation you see with, for example, husbands and wives who own a house together or a vehicle together, right? There's also, beneficiary designation. So even if it's not titled jointly, if you have a financial account, and I'm sure you see this all the time, Andrew, with your financial, accounts that you have for your clients, it might be in their name only, but they can put a pay or a transfer on death instruction on that account and say, hey, when I pass away, I want 50% to go to my brother and 50% to go to my wife, or whatever it is, right? Same thing with, life insurance, right? When you get life insurance, you identify a beneficiary who is supposed to receive it when you pass away. And the advantage of this beneficiary designation is that, it doesn't take a long time to get that money to your beneficiaries when you pass away. Really, all that they have to do is fill out some forms with the institution where the money's held and present a copy of the death certificate. And, you're pretty much good to go at that point. So the will is really there as a backstop. It deals only with the property that is in your sole name and is not jointly owned with somebody else and is not beneficiary designated. So, there are situations where sometimes somebody passes away and there is nothing to go through their probate estate. That's great, right? You don't have to deal with the administrative hassle and whatnot. And then there's trusts, right? Trusts are one way to avoid probate because by basically what you're doing is you're doing the work while you're still living that your executor would have had to do after you passed away to retitle the assets. So you're taking assets that you already own, you setting up a trust, right? The Brandon Peterson revocable trust or whatever you want to call it. And then you're transferring those assets into the trust or designating them into the trust. Your financial accounts, for example, could be designated into the trust when you pass. And that way, when you pass away, you don't have anything titled in your name, right? Everything's already titled in the trust or designated to go into it automatically. So that way you can avoid this probate process. A lot of the time when I'm dealing with married couples, we'll have the discussion and people will ask, should we set up a trust? And most of the time, the answer is no, because these married couples own everything together. There's really not much benefit to setting up a trust and trying to retitle everything now, right? And I say, when the unfortunate event happens that one of you passes, come back and we'll have that discussion now that the surviving spouse probably owns everything, and you have a bit more that might have to pass through probate on the second death.
Hmm. Okay, wow, yeah, that's really interesting. And talking about transfers on death, one time we had a client, it wasn't my client, but someone at our firm, they didn't put the transfer on death on the forms, and the client died, and the beneficiary basically had to, you know, deal with this expensive mess, and it
Yes,
cost them tens of thousands of dollars, and
that can
ultimately,
happen.
yeah, and I think it was like half a year or something of, just getting things through,
Hmm.
and the beneficiary actually left our firm because they were so frustrated because it was such a simple thing of
Yeah, it's a
just,
piece of paper, right?
yeah, it was just marking yes on transfer of death.
Hmm.
But the advisor either didn't know what to do or just forgot, and ultimately it cost tens of thousands. So these are like little things
Oh
that can
yeah,
make a huge difference in someone's life.
for sure. Let me give you a crazy example of that. If you don't,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
stories are always fun.
Yeah.
So when I was working at the that second firm I was telling you, specializing in estate and trust administration, we had a situation where there was somebody who had passed away. She was elderly. She didn't have any siblings. She didn't have any, her parents were gone. She didn't have a husband. And so there really wasn't anybody, around to even deal with it initially. By the time that one of her cousins realized what had happened and was appointed as the executor, she came to us and said, "So who's supposed to get this money that's sitting in this account with no designation on it?" And so we had to talk about intestacy, which is the fancy word for who gets your stuff when you don't have a will or when you don't have the designations, right? And
Mhm.
she didn't have any of this. So we had to go into the statute books, the law books, and start looking. Basically what it said is go look for her family members, right? So, well, she doesn't have any children. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have any parents left. She doesn't have any siblings. So who do we go to? Well, you start looking at the parents' families, right? So her father, he had some family. Her mother, though, had immigrated to the United States a long time ago from Germany. And so suddenly we were faced with a situation where we had to hire a genealogical research firm. I think we spent like $30,000 with these people hunting, through German land records and German, birth records and marriage, all this crazy stuff, right?
Mhm.
And they eventually, presented us with this report that was about this thick with all the evidence and said, "Hey, here's everybody that she's related to." And then we had to file a lengthy petition with the court saying, "Hey, we hired these people to do this research, and so who lives in wherever Germany is entitled to 1/394th share of the estate or whatever." So it can get very, very messy. In most situations, it doesn't because people have family and they have, people that it goes to kind of automatically. But sometimes, on the flip side of that, even if you do have people, you don't necessarily like them. You don't necessarily want them to have your stuff. So you see that situation as well, where lack of proper planning leads to some unintended consequences and, family fighting, right? If it's well known that you don't like your brother, but he's the only family member you got when you pass away, suddenly he's ending up with everything, and people that you might have been closer to or you wanted to benefit are not able to receive those assets. So definitely something to be thinking about. There are some consequences if you don't have good planning in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just listening to a podcast like last week on this. It was on the Dave Ramsey show, and one person, he died, and he gave all the money to um, his kids, but he also had stepkids, and the stepkids were like really upset because they felt like they were part of the family.
Right.
So a lot of times, if you're not careful with this stuff, if you're not having, and he had no conversation with the stepkid, like, by the way, you're not going to get any of this. And it ultimately destroyed the kids' relationship with each other. So I think it's important to be careful of like how you set this up so that you're not, destroying
Yeah.
relationships on the way out. Like you want to
Oh
have things
yes.
crystal clear on what you want to do with this stuff because there could be some difficult conversations, but
Hmm.
it's better to have those than to destroy relationships.
Yeah. I mean, even if you haven't had the conversation, just having it in a document at least gets rid of any uncertainty about, what you wanted, right? I mean, it's better to have the conversation. Sometimes those are very difficult to have, but at least having something written down that the court can follow through on um, is better than not having it there. My first boss at a law school used to say, "Money brings out the true colors in people." So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It makes you more of what you are, if you're if you're a greedy person, then you're going to be a greedy person with a lot of money. So, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about some other, did you mention you had a medical directive story and a POA story that you
oh
wanted
yeah,
to go through
sure.
as well?
Yeah, so again, to illustrate the importance of having these documents in place, I think I'll start with the power of attorney story, since we were just talking about assets passing to people when you pass away. So it's kind of a nice adjacent topic here. Uh, Dealt with a client, and this was after the client's parent had passed away, but the parent had three children. Two of them were just kind of normal, regular people. One of them had a lot of mental health issues, um, and the parent was very concerned what was going to happen to this child. And so this parent set up an estate plan whereby the assets would go into a trust, and each child would get a share, right? So it wasn't like we're just singling out the problem child with the trust. Everybody was going to get a trust. Um, the problem was is that after the parents set this estate plan up, they didn't really follow through and properly designate everything. Parent gets COVID. This is back during the early days of COVID, and the parent was in the hospital. Things were not looking good, and fortunately, part of the estate plan was to appoint one of the sons as the power of attorney, as the legal and financial agent. So when it became clear that parent wasn't going to make it, this son was able to step up and contact the financial institutions where all this money was held and say, "Hey, I'm the power of attorney, right? Please make these changes to designate these accounts into this trust." And when the parent passed away, the money was able to flow into the trust as planned, right? And there were a number of accounts in different institutions, different types of accounts, right? And they were all able to flow into the trust and therefore be there to support this child who had, the mental health issues and might not have been able to manage a large inheritance without messing it up or without squandering the money, right? Is kind of the concern. So having that power of attorney in place and authorizing this son to be able to update those designations as part of that power of attorney proved to be extremely helpful in streamlining the administration of this trust when this parent passed away from COVID.
Hmm.
So good to have those things in place because you might still be around, and your agent may need to act for you, and kind of help clean things up before you pass away, kind of in anticipation of the inevitable that's coming. So all of these are kind of unfortunate situations, but it just illustrates the importance of having these documents. And then to change topics a little bit to the or not from the financial to the healthcare directive. Uh, an attorney that I knew, his his mother went in for some chemotherapy treatment, and she had an allergic reaction to the chemotherapy, which sometimes happens. Sometimes you don't know that you're allergic to that because most people don't need chemotherapy.
Right.
And it very quickly became clear that she was not going to make it. So everybody rushes on down to the hospital, and her husband obviously was there. And the doctors ask her husband, this lawyer's father, are we going to put your wife on life support? And he says, yes, of course, please do. And so they rush on back um, to go do that. But they come back a little bit later and they actually say, who's this person? They name somebody else. And this attorney says that'd be me, right? I'm her son. And they say, she actually made you the healthcare agent. So I got to ask you now, are we going to put your mom on life support? And he looks at them all and says, no, we're not. And the reason he said that is because she had been very, very clear throughout her life. She did not want to be put on life support. She had pretty strong feelings about, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Don't keep me here unnecessarily. Make sure that I'm comfortable, and I'm taken care of, but I don't want to be kept here and have to linger and suffer and that kind of stuff. So, this lawyer's dad looked at him and said, yeah, that's why she chose you, because she knew, it's very hard to let somebody go in that situation, and this person being an attorney, he and dealing with these issues, right? I mean, he dealt with estate planning frequently. He was able to make sure that he could carry out her wishes in a way that his father, couldn't have, due to just the emotions and the difficulty of saying goodbye. So it was very important in that case that she, not only that she had a healthcare directive in place, but that she had named somebody, not only that she trusted, but that she knew who would follow through and make that difficult decision when the time came. These are all things
Absolutely.
to be thinking about when you're thinking about your documents, is not just putting them in place and what do you want to happen, but really, even more important than that is, who are you empowering through these documents? Who do you trust? Because the idea behind these, the thread that runs through all these documents, is you pick people who you trust and then you empower them to the max, because you're not going to be here. You're not going to be around, or you're not going to be competent to make these decisions. So who would you trust to step up and do the right thing by you?
Absolutely, yeah. And do you recommend giving these documents to your doctors beforehand?
You can.
Um,
Yeah, certainly. A lot of doctors will actually, I have found, they start asking when you change doctors, for example, you go to a new doctor and they'll say, do you have a healthcare directive? Yes, I do, actually, and let me, send you a copy of it. Yes, that's a great thing to do, because the last thing people are thinking about when something's happened and you're lying on the floor waiting for the ambulance is, let me go get that healthcare directive off the bookshelf. Like, nobody's thinking like that, right? So it's better to have it on file before something bad happens. That way, the doctor can just go into your medical file and say, oh yeah, okay, let's call up the agent and ask them what we're supposed to do here.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Makes it a lot
Absolutely.
easier.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really important to have those two people, ahead of time, have things ready for if you pass, things that are easily accessible, your passwords, your usernames,
Oh yeah.
where's the money, where is everything, how can you help your loved ones get into all your accounts? Like, having those is definitely crucial for people so
Yeah,
that they're
having a
not
separate list is a
wondering.
great idea.
Yeah, yeah,
Keep it with the
absolutely.
copies of your documents, right? That way it's all in one place.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so pivoting a little, can you touch on that, on some of more the deceptive practices and how to know if you have an estate planner that you trust, or if you just have someone who's, just trying to make money off you, needs the an update on the estate plans every couple of years? How do we avoid, like, what are some tall tale signs to know that we're dealing with an estate planner who actually has your best interests at heart and is not just, trying to give you all these estate planning documents, half of them that you don't even need, but they're telling you
Sure.
you need them because they're going to make an extra couple $1,000s.
Yeah, this is a tricky topic because, most people don't have a sense of what they need. And what people need is different depending on their asset levels and depending on their family situation, and depending on where they live, right? Like I was saying, some people, right, in some states, you probably need a trust, like no matter what, because you're going to end up in a situation where you want to avoid probate, right? Other states, maybe not so important. But I tend to find, reviews online, tend to be indicative of quality in many situations, right? I've dealt with attorneys before and looked them up online, and I'm like, oh yeah, you've got like 500 good reviews on Google. You're probably, a pretty trustworthy person. Um, on the other hand, there's there's a lot of attorneys who are very happy to upsell their clients on things that they maybe don't need. The trust being a good example, right? Some people you need one, some people you don't. But some attorneys like to just include that by default and maybe can't explain why beyond some vague kind of what if kind of statements. And so that, you know, it it really comes down to if the attorney is able to articulate why you and your specific situation, you know, would indicate a need for these additional documents, right? There are people who need to be thinking about tax planning, who need to be thinking about charitable giving, who need to be thinking about kids with special needs, right? Everybody's got some special nuance to their situation. And so the attorney's job is to be able to link those facts and take stock of all of that, synthesize it, and say, okay, because of this factor, because of this situation, I recommend these documents, right? Or I don't think that you need this document. I think that's one indicator of somebody who's trustworthy is they're willing to say, yeah, you know, I could, I could tell you need this, but I really don't think you do, right? That willingness to tailor just to what the client needs and not try and upsell and upsell and upsell, you know, is indicative of integrity. So it, again, like I said, that's a fine line to walk. It's very tricky to find somebody that you trust. So do your research, right? I mean, you can always look and find the attorney records online. You know, are they licensed in your state? Have they had any sort of disciplinary records before? You know, have they shown up in the news for anything bad happening to them? You know, things like that. And then just, like I said, reviews, you know, the other people who have dealt with them. That is always helpful to be able to see what other people have had, what their experience has been dealing with this person.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Brandon. Is there anywhere that people can find you if they would like to contact you about your services?
Yeah, so I have got to get my phone number up here. Recently changed it. Hold on. So my phone number is 443-681-9579. And I have an email address for my law office, bpetersonlaw@outlook.com. So that's where most of my clients find me. I also work with, you know, Andrew. So if you have questions, if you want to talk to Andrew, I'm licensed in Maryland, right? So if you're not in Maryland, I'm sorry, I probably can't help you. But if you are in Maryland, you know, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk with you about your situation.
All right. Well, thanks, Brandon. Thanks for making the time today, and thank you everyone for listening in.